Hello and welcome to Geek Warning. I'm Dave Rome, and this week is a little different from the regular. James had previously promised an episode from Eurobike, but there was a change of plans, and that'll come next week. Instead, I've got Brad Copeland back. Brad, welcome back to Geek Warning. How are things at Hush Money Bikes in Pennsylvania?
Hello. Thanks for having me back, Dave. Things are going great. You know, it's summer rush, a lot of activity every day, and just trying to stay above water over there. But yeah, we're doing a good job, so all is well.
How's it been working on more than one person's bike?
Oh, man. I forgot how hard that was. I was privileged enough to, for the most part, have one bike to worry about. And now the thing that I always liked about bike shops was sort of the surprise every day of what might wander in the door. So it's definitely keeps you on your toes and forces a little more creativity than, the same bike day in and day out with the same components for a year or two or more in a row, So the consistency is not there, but maybe it's a little more stimulating sometimes.
A bit more challenging at times.
A little more challenging at times. I learn more too each day.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I guess, this week we're recording this a few hours before the doors of Eurobike are opening. So as a result, we're a little early to tell you all that's new. Still, I think there's plenty to talk about. We've got a new tool that Brad and I have expected for a while. There's something fresh from Wolftooth. I'm keen to hear Brad's thoughts on the cross-country tech from Leogang, or lack thereof, should I say. And plus, we have some things on our mind. We have a PSA, and if there's time, maybe even a reader question for Brad. Okay, on with the show. This ep is made possible because of the generous support from our members. Memberships start from $12 per month, or save 30% with an annual payment. For more information, head to escapecollective.com/join. And I'd also like to give a special thank you to our Lifer members. These Lifer members supported us from day one, before we even had a website, and they made a huge donation to making Escape Collective a reality. So this week, I'd like to thank just a handful of you. We've got Jonas Mueller. Jonas, thank you so much. For anyone interested in what Jonas is up to, he's actually the owner of a contract engineering firm, bicycle.engineering. Great stuff. Someone I know, John Groves in Melbourne, long time tech nerd. I remember being a teenager and hanging out with John, or aka Grover, on weightweenies.com. So great to have your support. Thanks, John. Another friend of mine, Alan Miller from Tasmania. Alan and I used to do weird things on single speeds about 10 years ago. So thank you for your support, Alan. Stuart Voicey from SCV Imports. That's an Australian importer. They do a bunch of great things like Bomb Track and Chris King in Australia. Thank you for your support, Stuart. And Andrew Threffel, another Sydney local. He runs or is part of Catfish Designs, which is a custom clothing company, family business with wife Lana and Lana's mum. So thank you, Andy. All right, let's get into it. So the biggest news coming from Eurobike, which again haven't opened their doors yet, of course seems to be all e-bike related. Brad, I don't know if you've seen any of this stuff yet. It sort of came out overnight, but biggest news there is that Pinion have a powertrain. So they've integrated a motor and a gearbox in one enclosed system called the Motor Gearbox Unit. Have you seen anything like that?
I have not seen that yet, actually. That's news to me.
Yeah, it's sort of, it seems like it's a little while away, but it could be quite game-changing for the e-bike world. And I guess they're not the only ones. So the other interesting one was, you might remember this one, is Driven, which is like that offshoot drive shaft brand from Ceramic Speed that appeared at Eurobike a few years ago.
Yes.
It seems they've been fairly busy focusing on the e-bike world, and they've sort of shelved the idea of making the world's most efficient analog drive system, and rather they're making something similar again, like an all-in-one e-bike drive unit, drive train, I guess. It's using like a planetary gear system. It looks quite novel, I have to say. But yeah, that one kind of I found interesting because that's a company that had gone pretty quiet for a few years now, and it seems like they haven't gone anywhere. They've just been very busy. So, that's something that I'm intrigued by. It turns out that their analog drivetrain that they're working on, they got it to a point where it was actually functioning, and then they priced it out, and it was going to be about $14,000 for a drivetrain. And at that point, they realized that maybe the engineers were given too much of a free leash.
Yeah, free being relative, I think, in that sense. Yeah, I actually was wondering whatever would, if anything, become of that system. I was at Specialized at the time when they were working on that, and I was, there was some time spent developing a Specialized frame that could accommodate that system. And after all that, I was hoping to see something. So maybe it's this, and appropriate for Specialized to then evolve to e-bikes as the entire brand is heading in that direction, it seems, these days.
Yeah, I remember when Specialized was involved, they opened up their wind tunnel to Driven, and they obviously made that bike around it.
Yes.
Yeah, there was quite a close partnership there. So, but yeah, it was a quiet few years for that system, but it's coming back. So they're probably a company, Jason Smith, who used to run Friction Facts, who is someone I've worked with a lot over the years for information. So he's still their chief technology officer at Driven. So we might end up getting him on the podcast at some point. And even though it's e-bike, just to hear what he's up to and the problems that he's trying to solve for, and yeah, where his mind is, because he's obviously got a lot of things to share. And then, other news from the e-bike world is Bosch have entered the mid-power game with the Performance Line SX. So that's a category that I'm personally interested in. I'm looking at getting myself an e-mountain bike, and it's changing pretty quickly. Every few months I look again, and there's something new and exciting, which stops me from buying in. But it's that sounds like a pretty cool system. That's sort of that around that 60 Newton meter mark where a lot of people are playing, which allows you to have a lighter weight all-rounder e-bike. So keen to see where that goes. Yeah,
I'm kind of eager to see. I know there's been some teasers from our friend Gustav Dangerholm, as he's known to most folks. He's got a special e-bike project, a Scott Lumen-based ultralight e-bike. That'll be an interesting one too.
Yeah, have you seen it?
I've seen some little sneaks here and there, but no, I have not seen the final product. So I think that's going to be unveiled kind of in the probably next few hours, realistically. Probably first day of Eurobike. I'm sure he'll have that thing front and center and all over my Instagram feed as well. Yeah,
I think he may be building two of them. I think there was talk of him building like a weight weenie version and then like a practical version.
Okay.
So it will be interesting to see how light he can get that, though.
I know. I was going to say it might be comparable. I mean, that bike was already quite light. It was a pretty impressive bike when Scott released it. Anyway, I'm not necessarily the world's most enthusiastic e-bike fan, but some of the newer ones and some of the technology, like what you've just described, it's kind of starting to pique my interest. And when I left Sea Otter this year, I think one of the most interesting things just conceptually that I saw was the Shimano system that sort of marries the entire Di2 system and motor with an automatic shifting capability, which it wouldn't surprise me to see as I would expect something you could enable or disable as you prefer on a regular Di2 real normal bicycle, for lack of a better term, for what you would call a regular old mountain bike these days.
For sure.
But what was interesting was that it actually worked well and shifted when you wanted to, which any attempt I'd ever seen for automatic shifting in the past has been kind of a circus and never really seemed to do it when you wanted it, and always did it when the opportunity to shift had already come and gone. So I'm eager to see what else pops out in the next few days.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, as far as Eurobike goes, Eurobike for the last few years being the German-based show, it's world's biggest bicycle trade show. It's been very e-bike focused, very cargo bike focused. That doesn't seem to be changing at all, because that's where the European market is these days. I think those products that we just mentioned are probably the biggest news out of the show. But I'm sure James and Ronan, who are on the ground, will have. We'll be able to find enough other things to discuss next week as well.
I'm sure it's there somewhere.
Yeah. Also released, and this one's probably rather exciting for you and I, Brad, and maybe a handful of other people who work on wheels regularly, and maybe a few tool nerds. But Abbey Bike Tools have made their biggest tool yet, the touring stand.
Yes.
How would you describe this?
Well, it's a magnificent structure. First of all, just the machining and the quality of manufacture and the subsequent price tag are extremely impressive. I think those of us who have some familiarity with Abbey tools already kind of know what to expect and know how well thought out things are before they make it to production. So I have not had my hands on it yet. I've been fortunate enough to be an ambassador with Abbey tools for 5 or 6 years at least now. And so I have had some conversations with Jason and a couple of our other ambassadors, the likes of which include John Hall, who's Aaron Gwynn's mechanic, and a few other guys who are shop based in the United States, or some demo guys in the United States, and guys who use tools in different applications and all provide their own feedback to Jason, who somehow manages to synthesize the ridiculous things we say and produce a product that kind of blows all of our minds at the same time as everyone else when they finally appear. So I kind of had an idea of what was coming, but it's still, seeing it in real life and in a more or less final form, it's quite impressive. And the fact that it's all rolls on bearings and it's sort of the precision that you come to expect from Abbey tools is obviously there. And I expect it to be a game changer for those of us who can bite the bullet and or maybe have a shop who's willing to invest in something of that quality. Yeah,
it is quite the investment. I mean, we're looking at US $1,450 as a base price, and then there's options above that. You can get Matsuchio dial gauges, and then there's one with digital gauges that works with a pretty sophisticated and pretty clever, measuring system it's sort of auto zero, so you don't have to then adjust the dials all the time, which is pretty cool. It has a foot pedal for recording data, which is also very neat. But yeah, I mean, from that stand, it seems to me like when you talk about wheel touring stands, you get a lot of opinions, as you sort of just alluded to. Like everyone kind of has their personal favorite and their way of working with a touring stand. And it kind of feels like Abbey might be catering to more than one desire with the way it's gone about things. So they've got, the wheel dishing, centering, alignment, alignment gauges, I guess, which stay centered to the stand. And then there's also like a more movable pivoting arm that you can put anywhere against the wheel to use as like a secondary gauge. So what's your preference?
Well, among the other things I may have suggested or requested be featured here, that was one of them. And I always had problems whether by design or lack of design or wear and tear and kind of loose tolerances, let's say, touring stands I've had in the past, you had one side or the other that was sort of the drive side and needed to be referenced as like the spot to measure dish from. So that to me was kind of a no-brainer. Just have one that was always in dish. Although, of course, we have a few examples in the industry of wheels that are, maybe asymmetrical relative to what is normal. How do I even put this into words? But
like a Cannondale SI
exactly.
wheel.
That's where I'm going with this. So perhaps that's the auxiliary kind of caliper reference point might be useful in such a scenario. But also just a simpler way to, which he's used, I think, using kind of a cone-shaped insert into a through axle that can kind of take any common axle diameter and not need an adapter or anything unusual to just quickly mount it right into the stand, which is something very simple in theory, but somehow hasn't really existed commonly in other brands yet. So I'm excited about that. And I'm a geek for high quality things. So in general, I was pleased to see, cartridge bearings all over the place and a lot of clever features that just ensure that things are going to be super tight tolerance where you're not working around a jiggly fit like some of the park stands I've used recently, where you're kind of always readjusting the caliper because the thread is a little bit, there's a little bit of a loose tolerance, I would say. So
Sure.
I'm pretty excited to see it in real life. I expect it is quite a hefty thing, even though it's machined from aluminum, but I'm curious to see kind of what it feels like in real life to use and how intuitive it is. But I have a feeling it's going to exceed my expectations in every way.
Yep. I'm keen to get your thoughts on truing stands while we're on the topic, just truing stands for home mechanics. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, is there something light and relatively affordable that you may have traveled with before that you liked?
I've never traveled with a truing stand, for better or worse. I've always had, I was always been based in the United States, but traveling with teams that are based in Europe, at least for World Cup action. And we have team trucks with a truing stand inside. So the necessity for lightweight, compact, truing stands was perhaps not as significant, but, the so-called kind of ghetto fix that we would often do if we were in a pinch somewhere was just to simply zip tie as the caliper reference point, a zip tie, a stiff enough one that it was relatively stable, and use the frame and true it on the bike. If you're simply doing kind of rough trues at home that don't have to be perfectly in round and perfectly dished and perfectly trued, but are more or less kind of like a home job, let's say, just working on your own equipment, that's been just a super cheap, obviously, hack that works surprising. I mean, it works quite well. You're, of course, not going to get anything close to the precision or the ability to measure and record and all that stuff that you have with Jason's new revelation. But nevertheless, that's been my home hack, which, for better or worse, I have quite a number of.
Yeah, for me, it's, the zip ties is hard to go past for the value for money, but it's, I've always, for home mechanics, thought like the Feedback Sports do a truing stand. It's a one-sided arm.
Yes, I was going to say that one too. I've never used it, but that's the one that I would use, I would say, if I needed something. It used to be so awesome, like when everything was quick release, because the quick release would hold it in. And then there was quite a few years where it became quite terrible because they didn't really have a great solution for mounting a through axle wheel in it. But now the latest iteration of that stand comes with a pretty good thread together through axle adapter. It's not the quickest stand to use. Like you'd be pretty annoyed by it if you were in a shop with that. But for home use, it's probably one of the better options I've found. So anyway, for anyone listening that doesn't want to spend $1,400 on a truing stand, then Feedback Sports probably gets my vote for at the opposite end of things. So yeah, I was in the shop today too and thinking about this very truing stand as I was using another one and using it to not just true some wheels, but also while I had the wheels off, clean them and thought how reluctant I would be to clean a wheel or maybe even true, or rather glue a tubular tire, which I usually do using the truing stand as my holder, and sometimes drip a little bit of glue in the process. And most shops, if you go into them, at least road shops, there'll be a little essence of tubular glue somewhere on the truing stand. So definitely something I would want to have something besides the Abbey tool truing stand in my shop, just for the dirty jobs that, like so many of his tools, I don't want to even get dirty because they're so beautiful.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to spend so much on a product like that and then probably still need to hold on to the old one for the jobs that don't deserve it. So
yeah, exactly.
It's some might say it's almost too nice, but anyway. All right, let's move on away from the truing stuff. I'm keen to just talk quickly about this little one by chainguide. So we've seen this being used by Jumbo Visma, Wolftooth. They're a sponsor of the team. They have the LoneWolf. It's a $40 road and gravel chain keeper for one by rings. It comes in 3 mount options, so there's different heights depending on, I guess, your chain ring size and also how high the braze-on mount sits in relation to your chainring. So they've got that covered. Also, if you own a current generation Cervelo S5 like the team does, then they've got a direct fit mount for that for aero gains. But why I'm interested in this is it's kind of returning to a conversation we've previously had on the Geek Warning podcast, which is the drop chain of Roglic at the Giro in the penultimate time trial. He was in the lead and looking like he's on his way to the Giro win, and his chain on a 1x chain ring dropped off going over somewhat of like a water drain, and there was panic, and he still ended up winning, but there was a lot of talk over what had caused that. And at the time, I'd heard from a source that was in the car saying it dropped off the chainring. But what's interesting is Wolftooth have said that the team confirmed that it was actually off the back of the 44-tooth cog off the cassette, which is also why he was able to get going so quickly, because he just ripped it back out of off the back of the cassette and put it back on, and off he went. And that this chain guide, apparently, according to the team, when it's installed correctly, the chain cannot be taken off. What do you think?
Well, it's a good idea for sure. We always had the same approach on the mountain bike side, and back in my Specialized days, we were fortunate enough that a very small Czech Republic, that is, based company, it seemed like a one-man show, would make custom chain guides for the Epics, which mounted using like an expanding wedge type system inside of the main pivot on the swing arm of the bike. Nice. And it was quite a clever little thing, but it was not a production item. And of course, the bikes would be shown in photos, and everybody wanted one. And they don't weigh much. They're not complicated to use if they're engineered well. And it's, especially for guys whose livelihood it is to race bikes, and especially ones who are capable of winning such races as the Giro. I think it's a extremely valid and relatively lightweight, simple product that doesn't really get in the way of anything. So I'm all for it. Especially on mountain bikes, I think it's almost essential, even though the 1x systems have gotten so good. There's no reason to risk something you don't need to. And on the road, I think those guys are, especially in a race like the Giro, the surfaces are so different that you can't necessarily rely on smooth pavement or expect smooth pavement. So, I think it's a great idea. And in fact, we just ordered a similar product from K-Edge to put on a bike for a customer who has a 1x road bike setup just this week. So, I'm in the chain guide camp for sure.
Yeah. So this new Wolftooth one, I guess, where it's different from other chain guides, including Wolftooth's own, they had one for cyclocross use before, is the team Jumbo Visma had apparently requested something a bit more aerodynamic. So this is kind of just almost a one-sided. It captures the chain on like the left hand, the inner side of the chainring, and then on top, and then just by being close enough to the top of the chain, it doesn't let the chain lift off, so they therefore don't need the outer portion of the guide. So it's quite minimalist. The other nice thing is that it's shim free, so there's kind of like this nice little expanding design that lets you adjust the chain line and then bolt it into place. It expands into place, so it's from what I've seen, very quick and easy to adjust. So it solves some of the other chain guides on the market. You kind of have to shim carefully into place, and they can be quite annoying to set up. So it looks like a good product for $40, but yeah, I guess you're saying is when given the choice, you'd always run a chain guide with a 1x.
I would say it. I also think that on a road bike too, I think there's some opportunity there, and it sounds like Wolftooth is maybe leading the charge to have a pretty simple and minimalist one where you don't have to worry about the height of the chain relative to the chain guide at the chainring, moving it all through suspension articulation like you do a little bit on a mountain bike. So you can really clean it up and make it quite a compact and tidy little piece, I would think. And it's nice to see somebody actually putting some real engineering thought into that, not just sort of re-engineering an existing product and clamping it kind of roughly to a seat tube and hoping for the best. So I like it. I'm all for it.
Yeah,
100%. Yeah.
The only thing I'm keen for that hasn't been released yet is the fact that they've got a direct mount for a Cervelo, which is obviously a team issue product. I'm looking at my gravel bike, which has a removable front derailleur tab, and I'm just like, I don't want to like put the the heavy aluminium front derailleur tab back on to then add this chain guide on top of that. I mean, that's just so wasteful. So who knows? Maybe Wolftooth will have like 150 different products in future.
Oh, that's what the bike industry needs.
For everyone's gravel bikes.
Yeah. And they all look subtly different with almost no way of determining one from the other until you mount it up and realize you got the wrong one.
Yeah. I mean, like the UDH is actively fixing the rear derailleur hanger woes of there being hundreds and hundreds of different rear derailleur hangers. So maybe we could get Wolftooth to bring back the number of available products by making various direct mount chain guides.
Yeah, say what you will about the transmission, but I would say that, and I like it, by the way, just for the record, but that is the thing I like maybe even more, is that regardless of whether you're using the SRAM transmission products or not, to see the industry accept one standard for something that's been a source of headaches, especially for those of us who've lived in the shop for a number of years. That's a real win. So thanks to SRAM and everyone else who got on board for that one. But yeah, we'll see if K-Edge can undo what was been done already. I'm sorry, Wolftooth, excuse me. Sorry.
Yeah. I'm sure they're not keenly looking at this at the moment, but hey, I'll take one if they are.
Yeah.
Brad, did you watch the World Cup Leogang? Did you tune in? Did you watch the racing?
Yeah, I watched most of it. Yes, I would say. Yeah, I didn't get up quite early enough to catch the beginning, but I watched the highlights of the beginning and the rest of it.
Yeah. What did you think of the course?
That course is tricky. It's especially for bike selection, because it's so steep and the climbs are quite long. I would say it's definitely the most sort of favors the climbers more than any course currently on the circuit anymore. Albstadt was kind of the only place you used to see hardtails used. I would maybe not even by the majority, but at least in a large percentage of riders. With that no longer on the circuit, Leogang's kind of the last bastion of hardtail use for a few riders, and we saw a few of them there. But even, then you come back down, it's super rooted, it's often wet. A lot of times they have new sections of single track cut like just prior to the race happening, so it's not really worn in. There's no groove or, obvious clear line choice, which is both good and bad because it creates a lot of opportunity for taking many lines and exciting passes to happen and that sort of thing. But it can make the setup a bit of a roll of the dice. Mm-hmm. But they got good weather this year, so that was I think to the riders in their favor. It was hot. Yeah, it was hot, but I think they'd rather it be hot than wet, because that course is a pretty scary one when some of those descents are pretty. With the roots, when they get wet and a little bit of slimy mud on top, it's pretty wild. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. It surprised me a little bit. Like we saw a few hardtails, as you mentioned, like Mona Mitterwellner, Austrian rider. She managed to get herself into second place on the podium, which is an amazing result. She was sort of one of the more notable riders, I guess, to be on a hardtail, a Cannondale hardtail. But yeah, everyone else seemed to be sticking with the regular bikes. I'd say there were fewer dropper posts than what you normally see, maybe
on the men's side. I feel like the women are less prone to switching back and forth as much, and are more, almost entirely, if not entirely, the whole field riding a dropper post now. The men still do on these courses where you climb so much. They will opt for one or the other, but I'm also in the sort of 100% dropper post all the time camp, even if it's a bit heavier. I think the safety in it, it's faster, and even like flat turns, to drop it just a little bit makes me feel more comfortable on my bike. So certainly on the steep, rooty stuff, I think that measure of control is for me, I have to have it now. I can't ride a bike without it. I was sort of against it at first, kind of like I was with 29-inch wheels. And both times I was very humbled, and immediately upon riding it, changed my mind. So, I did. I think also maybe it was Ann Terpstra, if I'm not mistaken, Ghost rider, who they were on I think it was her. I have to go back and check now. It was certainly a Ghost rider, because it was a Ghost hardtail that was they talked about in the broadcast and I've seen before. It has some engineered flex and some very curvy seat stays that facilitate that flex vertical compliance, but is nevertheless still, by all accounts, a hardtail. But there still were, I would say overwhelmingly, it was a full suspension track for most people, at least by most people's estimation. And yeah, I was super happy to see Mona there. I actually had her pick to win. She's pretty motivated to perform in front of her home crowd. And I think it was last year that she had a crash at the start of the race, got tangled up right off the start line before even the first climb, before the first turn. And among other things, it was a Cannondale with a lefty fork and managed to rip the caliper off the fork. It has a slotted caliper for the disc caliper to mount to, rather than, a hole that you run a bolt through, so it can actually come out of the slots. And due to some unbelievable bad luck, it got pulled out. And so she had quite a fare in the tech zone, and then put down some of the fastest laps of the race, but was so far behind that the result didn't really speak to her capabilities that day. But this year, I was proud to see, she delivered on expectations.
Yeah. Yeah. The Austrian certainly lived up to the whole home track, home crowd, cliche of in the downhill winning men's and women's.
Yes, men's and women's, and Laura Stigger also in for third place in the women's cross country as well. So another good showing for a young Austrian girl. And it might be the best kind of like home crowd result ever for a World Cup. I have to go back and check my notes on that, but probably to get that many people on the podium and that many wins, it's pretty impressive. Yeah.
Is there any tech on the downhill side that you have spotted that you think is really interesting that might become more widely applicable, or is it?
I'm dying to know what's exactly underneath Loic Bruni's and Finn Iles's. It's a humongous cover these days. It used to be kind of like a bag and sort of like didn't look so good. Now it's quite a clean little compartment. For sure, there's some electronic Olin suspension products under there. I'm not exactly sure what those are, but you can see in some photos some buttons look like almost like a PlayStation keypad on the left side of Loic's cockpit setup, where there's at least 3 buttons there to control. Maybe he's just, maybe he is like,
maybe he's just a big fan of like Zwift, and it's that new Zwift controller that he just got mounted on the handlebar.
True. Yeah, we'll see a release from Zwift next week for some downhill simulation stuff for sure.
Yeah.
I would think it's probably not unlike Formula One, where there's some preset kind of different setups that, I mean, I used to work kind of alongside the downhill program when I was at Specialized. I was not directly involved, but was quite friendly with their guys and would go snoop around. And they were some of the first to pioneer a lot of that data capturing, electronic suspension data capturing stuff. And it's pretty universal now, especially on the downhill side, to strap some sensors to the bike that measure the performance and then go back and look at everything. So I would expect to see, they're using that now to create kind of 3 preset modes for the suspension to work in. And he kind of is able to select among those and do it relatively, easily without having to look at it too much, because you don't have a lot of time to look away from what's right in front of you on a downhill track. So I'd be very curious to see what exactly that is. You can definitely see on the top of the fork that there's a little bit of wire and kind of electronic connections happening there too. So, I think that is the electronic suspension and the data capturing capability is probably something that we'll see transcend all of the sport. It's already beginning. So maybe it's a good segue into Nino Schurter's new products on his bike, also on the cross country side.
Yeah, we mentioned that briefly last week, but I mean, what do you know about it? That, like, it's obviously a flight attendant. It's looking very production ready, but yes. Do you know what it's trying to achieve?
Well, so basically, it's the same concept as what they were trying to achieve when they released it on the enduro side. I was sort of shocked that it did not come out as a cross-country product in the first place.
Yeah, same.
It seems like that's like the perfect application for it. Also, those bikes are kind of quite silly looking when they have so many cables with lockout switches, dropper post cables if you're not using the electronic version, brake hoses. So you have 5 or 6 hoses flopping around up there, or hoses and housings. And it's quite a clutter, and especially cable routing and cable friction is also a factor. So I think that sort of simplifying, so to speak, the bike with some electronic aids to manage the suspension at least is a good idea, as long as it works. And it seems to have worked well for him at Lenzerheide. So I'd say RockShox is probably on track with that being close to production ready. I know that we have we've always had some exclusivity with SRAM when I was with the Scott SRAM team, getting some of their products first with like a bit of an agreement that we would be the first to have access to those. Of course, Nino is a good person to hand anything to if you want to see good results immediately. So he's a pretty good bet in that department. So, and the way that those products function with a completely open, fully active mode, a fully locked out mode, and then the kind of in-between mode where it's kind of a little bit more compression damping that firms everything up for pedaling purposes. That's kind of been Scott's bread and butter for years with their twin lock suspension system, which does the same thing, but with a mechanical actuation. So for me, that was the perfect platform to use it on. And I expect probably by World Championships, you'll see a lot more riders using it. But we have, with probably some exclusivity that has been agreed to on the front end. So
yeah, okay.
Stay tuned. But yeah, I bet that's going to become something everyone has access to by the end of the season.
Yeah, you're mentioning like the data acquisition from the Specialized team and how they wanted the first to do that, and it's now pretty common in the downhill world for them to use it during like time training and that sort of early course practice, I guess, to get a feel for the course. And a lot of teams will use this technology. Have you ever seen it being used in cross country?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's super common. It's more and more common these days too. Specialized, if you look at some of their own cross-country riders during practice as well, you'll see the very same types of capture devices. Usually theirs is mounted somewhere along the seat tube of the frame. There's like a zip-tied box that has obviously the hardware inside that does whatever recording and measuring is taking place, but there's little devices kind of strapped from the top of the fork crown to either the steer leg or possibly the axle, and a similar one along the length of the rear shock that is kind of taking measurements in real time and providing that feedback. So they're already using it. Scott has been discussing how to use it and working with the company to do one because of the internally mounted rear shock. It's a little bit trickier perhaps, but not impossible. So there's always been some interest there from the cross country side, and it's starting to show up. So with these tracks have gotten so technical in the last 5 or 7 years maybe. It's kind of the same reason you rarely see a hardtail race at a World Cup anymore. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. It was like 2010 or so when Jaroslav Kulhavy won the first cross-country World Cup on a full suspension bike. So a decade later, it's almost 100% of people using them at every race. And so the suspension side of the game has definitely taken on a significant level of importance, I think, among not just the racers, but the engineers and everyone who's thinking of these bikes in the first place. That's, I think, probably the strongest point of emphasis, and perhaps why a lot of the bikes are starting to look kind of similar.
Yeah,
too.
Yeah, they're all landing at similar designs, aren't they?
Yes.
With the exception of Scott.
Yes.
I guess the other thing, is that travel's increasing, right? For the last decade, everyone ran 100 mil, and 100 mil fork, and normally 100 mil in the back as well. Maybe give or take 10 mil, but we're seeing that increase. And I guess with that increasing, there's more scope to, gain extra performance and tweak the settings. So I guess that will open the door more to the data acquisition side of things.
I think so. Yeah. And it also allows you to run the suspension setup maybe a little bit softer than you would have on a shorter travel bike, because you're not trying to preserve all that stroke for the big hits anymore. You can actually run with proper sag, which, as you up from the downhill side, they run quite a bit of sag into the rear, into both the fork and the rear shock, so that they have, the ability for the bike to track over holes and ruts in the ground, and just basically to remain in contact with the surface as much as possible. And so, when you're sort of compromising the setup or running it too stiff or running it with less sag because you want to have enough stroke for big hits on the course, because cross country, you're on pavement to start, climb up a steep fire road, and then you bomb down parts of the downhill track to come back down the hill. It's like you kind of need a pretty flexible setup for, pardon my pun, but to be able to do all of those things well. So with a bike with more travel and suspension that's quite sophisticated compared to the early stuff we saw in cross country, I think that's kind of the next frontier for cross country bikes. And with the exception of maybe the Trek, and then the new Specialized that just was released, that have actually quite a bit less rear travel than we've grown accustomed to. It seems everybody else wants more. And Scott there's a lot of talk about 120 mils being too much when it was released like 2 years ago. And now it's like basically the normal amount. And Yolanda got some attention in Lenzerheide for racing a Top Fuel there, which had 120 mils of travel as well. So maybe that's a little bit of a indication of that Trek perhaps kind of having gone the wrong direction when everybody in the industry was trending towards longer for cross country use. So
yeah. The rumor is that Super Cow, which is pretty short, like it's 60-ish mil travel.
Exactly.
The next iteration won't be so short in travel.
I would expect that to be true.
Longer.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, I've been spending a bunch of time on the new Specialized Epic World Cup, which is their short travel version, sort of the hardtail replacement. And let's just say I'm not convinced. So yeah.
I think I have at each race, since they released that bike, I've been quite interested to see who's actually is using it. It's getting used here and there, but I would say, let's say the team hasn't bought into it fully, because so many of them, I think last week in Lenzerheide, I don't think anybody used it. I might be wrong about that, but it certainly seemed overwhelmingly that the team was racing on the Epic Evo with 120 or at least 110 mils in the fork, and also manual suspension controls, as opposed to a brain shock, which has been their bread and butter since my childhood, basically. So I think you see from the riders too that maybe what the industry thinks and what is really necessary on the tracks that they're racing, it's maybe not 100% in alignment yet, but it's an interesting thing.
Yeah, I think Leogang was pretty telling as well. Is that you saw some riders select the hardtail over their full suspension bike, yet Specialized factory weren't unanimous on riding their hardtail replacement bike. A lot of them stuck to the Epic Evo with the as you say, the remote manual lockout. So yeah, certainly quite telling, and it sort of reinforces what I've been experiencing on the trail as far as it being a very sharp tool that's not great for cutting a lot of things.
Okay, nice, well put. Yeah, that's nice.
All right, let's move away from mountain bike chat, or perhaps we'll get back into it. I'm keen to hear what's been on your mind, Brad. What's been occupying your thoughts, and perhaps maybe over the head of the family, that's something you can't, it's perhaps not worth talking about at the dinner table.
Oh gosh. Well, I know we always lament some of our own personal bugaboos that we encounter day to day, just you and I offline privately, not on a podcast for everyone to hear. But the one that's just been bothering me so much lately has been road tubeless.
Why? It's perfect. What's wrong?
I love it in theory. I really do. But it's just, I think it's just because it needs to be such a lightweight system. I just think it's just such a maintenance-y, tedious thing to actually have and just feel like your bike is going to be ready to go all the time. I don't know. It just trips me out, because I just see these, they sit for too long and you lose the seal, and then you have to refill it with sealant because it's spilled out because the depth of the tire is so shallow, and blah, blah, blah. That's just one of those things that it's been like 10 years or more since kind of started creeping into the scene, and
yeah,
it's basically the new standard. But I don't know. I'm not convinced that it's right yet. I don't know how to necessarily articulate my true feelings without sounding like an ass. But
yeah, I mean, the industry's butchered it, right? Like, as far as an implementation, they have truly made a mess of it.
So many standards that have come and gone or are still together simultaneously but aren't compatible with each other. Tires, are they hookless? Are they hooked? Are they compatible? Are they not? Which ones do I have? Which ones are these? It doesn't necessarily always even say. You have to look up a chart online to tell what tires are compatible with your rims, and then you have to look up what tires are actually available in the industry, which, we're getting better than we were in 2020 and 2021 when the pandemic was really hitting us super hard. But I've been trying to get my hands on some 28 mil Continental Grand Prix 5000 tubeless tires for Unicorn like a year, literally for a year. And we just checked today, and now they're pushed out again until September for the next delivery, at least to our distributors over here, that we use day to day. We checked 2 different ones, and same story. So, it's just a funny thing. I'm not losing too much sleep over it, but it's kind of like become a running joke for me and a few others in my circle who know how my brain works and my preferences work, I guess you'd say. But that one's just a funny one that's been throwing me curveballs left and right lately. So it's just on my mind.
Yeah. What's I guess from a customer point of view, are you suggesting people go road tubeless at this time, or are you putting tubes in their wheels? That's
another point of contention for me, just inner turmoil, because I want to suggest it because I know that when it's working well and everything's set up and fine, it's definitely a superior system. I mean, we're even seeing that the fastest tires in the world now are in fact tubeless. At least for there's a handful of tires that are measuring faster than anything that's tubular or anything, that's a very high thread count clincher tire with the latex tube in there, which has kind of been the sort of old fast setups. And now they actually have fast tubeless tires that are faster than anything that's ever existed. Great. Love it. That's what I, get out of bed for. But it's like, do I trust these people to like go inflate their tires before they leave for a week and a half vacation just so that it has some in there to hold, to hopefully buy them some time that it's going to not like lose its seal, and then they come home to a puddle on the floor and their bike's sitting there and then they have to come back in. So it's like, yes, I do recommend it. I think it's great, but I just wish that there was some way that it could exist like that, but also not create like little headaches for people, because the last thing that I want in the bike shop especially is, for someone who's paying, God, tires, by the way, are like $100 a tire now, which is sticker shock. I hadn't seen the price of a tire in a while, having been on the race scene for a number of years. Whoa. And so, you saw somebody $200 worth of tires on a couple G's in the wheel set, and then if a couple, maybe $150 to do the labor to set everything up and all the sealant and everything that you used and blah blah blah, and then it's like come back in 2 weeks because they parked their bike and then the whole thing kind of came undone. It's like, well, I feel like there's just got to be a better way out there, and I'm sure somebody is working on that as we speak. So I hope they kind of more or less got it sorted out for mountain bikes eventually. It did take some time also. We must remember for mountain bikes to really come up with a standard that everybody kind of followed. And, the early days, there was only 3, I think it was Hutchinson, Michelin, and Specialized of all people. And I think Specialized had to recall there. So really just 2 in the UST days of tubeless at the very beginning for mountain bikes. And, then they abandoned that standard altogether and moved on to something else. And Stan came along and did his thing. And then kind of somehow we ended up where we are. But, I feel like we're kind of in the mid phase with road tubeless right now. We haven't quite gotten to the end of the game yet. So I'm going to stick around till the game kind of concludes. But it's something I would like to be able to recommend more confidently than I am recommending it now. But I'm still recommending it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you're probably in the same boat as me, which is I use it but don't necessarily recommend it.
Yeah, exactly, and that's not really the way I want things to be, like, because when people see my bike and I'm like, yeah, but you shouldn't do it because you're not ready for that. Yeah. It's like, that doesn't really. Yeah,
you kind of like customers, you kind of judge based on like the condition of their chain, whether they're suitable for tubeless or not.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, how much gunk is on their rear derailleur pulleys, and if none, then they can have tubeless.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I was also for a number of reasons, maybe the biggest one being because I'm sort of a nerd and like to be kind of exclusive about my bike setup, was running tubulars for most of my life. And I still have some bikes with tubulars on them now, and I love them, but I definitely never recommend them to anybody else, and tubeless is not quite to the level of tediousness when it goes south as tubulars, but it's kind of there. Yeah. It's kind of a mess. And it seems like it's advertised and talked about like it's the solution to all the problems, but it really just opens a whole other can of worms that didn't exist before. So it's like, not sure if I am really fully convinced yet, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see. Jury's out on tubeless road, but
yeah. No, I think we're exact same, which is just really like it in theory. Just wish it were more user friendly, but, oh well, we'll keep whinging about this one. It's a good one to complain about, especially as more bikes come stock with tubeless on the road. And yeah, I think there's certainly room for improvement still. So
yes.
But it's clear the industry's pushing in this direction. So
for sure.
On my mind, Brad, you might get a kick out of this. It's probably a bit of a running joke on the podcast now because it's probably the fourth or fifth time I've mentioned this, but still chain breakers. I'm still thinking about chain breakers. And my most recent thought is I've been using the Shimano TLCN 29, I think it is, which is like, it's kind of like their consumer, like their plastic chain breaker, which is like that mid-range. It's quite small. It's made of plastic. It's got a little handle. And I've been using that lately. And what's been surprising me is that despite being smaller in size, it actually feels like it takes less force to use than pretty much any professional massive handled chain breaker out there.
No kidding.
Like it kind of just like pops the rivet with less feedback through the hands. And that has sent me down a rabbit hole of trying to I've been most recently using an car oil filter wrench as like a handle to turn the chain breaker handle with the base of the chain breaker mounted in a vise. And then I've been using like a digital torque wrench on that oil filter wrench to measure like peak torque.
This is why I love you. Yeah.
And like surprisingly, it seems from what I can tell, I need to do more repeated tests. I'm probably going to come up with a better handle solution than the oil filter wrench. But from what I can tell is like that little plastic mid-range Shimano chain breaker requires less force than even Shimano's own professional chain breaker.
Then you have to do a subsequent analysis of sort of its longevity, and then cost per tool, and extrapolate sort of like, would it be a better investment to buy 6 of these knowing they wear out, or one professional one and it's so that's like some complicated calculus you have to do on that one, I think. But that's very interesting. I haven't used that particular one. I've actually, so I know that we've talked about my drawer foam, which was a long process, and we can skip over the details, but I have 3 chain breakers in my drawer because, again, I like to think I'm thoughtful and well prepared, but as I got back into the shop as my primary function, and as we mentioned at the start of the podcast, I was working on just one bicycle for a number of years. And so I have 2 Abbey Decades, one with the mid plate for axis chains and one with the mid plate for like every other kind of modern drivetrain, but it doesn't work on like 8-speed stuff, So I have a Pedro's one for that too. because I don't want to switch the mid plate in one Abbey Decade tool, because that's like kind of annoying when you're like, you know, in the middle of a job or whatever. And I'm lucky enough to have had two in the first place, to have one at home and one in my travel box. But blah, blah, blah. I didn't even realize really, or didn't even think about it as not being compatible with some of the mid-Z kind of bikes that you see in the bike shop relatively frequently. You know, so at least half the time I'm in there, I'm using this Pedro's one, because the other two, you know, super deluxe Abbey, fanciest chain tools ever, blah, 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 don't even work on on these cheaper bikes. And maybe that's by design. You know, maybe that's kind of what Jason wanted. He's like, if you're working on those, then who cares? Yeah,
it makes it more precise for the modern stuff where the precision's needed, but
exactly.
Limiting.
But I was sort of surprised, and I haven't broached the subject yet, because as generous and thoughtful and whatever as Jason is and has been to me, I don't want to put another project on his lap, but I'd like to see a mid plate, maybe for like those older ones that has just a little bit more clearance between the back plate of the chain tool, where the chain kind of rests and you push against, and where it's held by the mid plate, where it sort of sits in between the links of the chain. There's just not enough clearance there to wedge a slightly wider spec chain from like a 9 or 8 speed or lower even sometimes. So that was a funny revelation from my side, but I haven't yet applied a torque wrench and various methods for capturing exactly how much force I'm using, because it didn't really seem like it was so much that it was a problem. So I was willing to accept what I was handed.
No. I would like to think I'm the only person wasting time on this non-problem.
I would expect that you might be, but nevertheless, I'm glad you're doing it, because I love to hear about these things.
Yeah.
And also not have to go through the struggle of actually performing the task myself to find out. Yeah.
But it's racking my brain at the moment, because this small little Shimano is outperforming much larger chain breakers, and I'm not sure why, because the way it holds the plates is much the same, and the way the pin works on a bearing is much the same. And yeah, I'm thinking there's maybe like some, like the equivalent of ride quality in the plastic design, that it's like maybe the flex is leading to a better experience. So yeah,
you're getting some damping quality out of the plastic.
Exactly.
Somehow.
Exactly.
Yeah, micro vibrations. Yeah, been hearing about it for years, but maybe finally this is the first time it's actually existed in real life in the bike industry.
Yeah. So anyway,
well, I'll stay tuned for your analysis and subsequent results. So I'm excited.
Thanks, Brad,
and good luck.
Thank you. All right, let's jump into our PSA. I don't think we've had one of these for a few weeks, and I'm keen to talk about something, Brad, you might have been seeing a bunch lately, and anyone that works in a shop probably does as well. The PSA is to check your mechanical shifter cables, specifically when you're running drop bar shifters.
Yeah.
What's this all about?
Well, it's a valid PSA. First of all, where I'm seeing it the most, where I'm seeing problems the most from not having checked it, is in the sort of latest couple of generations of Shimano road shifters in particular, where if you're familiar with how the cables route, it kind of routes from the outboard facing side of each lever, kind of across the front, as it were, but inside, obviously, the hood, and then makes a very sharp bend and enters the cable housing via a little groove in the shifter body from the inside part of the hood. And where you see the wear and the frayed cables, and then the real nightmare is actually extracting the broken head from the cable, is because of that sharp bend, and the wear from just the tension on the cable as it, a few thousand times of shifting back and forth. It just slowly wears one or two of those little strands of cable. And once one or two of them get kind of bunched up in there, you start to notice some lagging or some inconsistency in the shift performance, or you lose access to a couple of gears because the bunched up cable that has already started to fray it won't move anymore, or you have to really force it past. And then that's when you start to really cause me potentially some problems, because oftentimes they come to me and people think there's something wrong with the derailleur or whatever. But, for better or worse, I've seen them so many times that I can almost stop a person in their sentence before I even look at the bike and tell them you have a broken cable in the shifter right at the head of the cable because of this very thing we're talking about. So it's become something that I've told my other mechanics at the shop and everyone else there too, just recommend a cable replacement like once a year for anyone who has these, because you're going to be replacing it anyway, but at least you just do it on the front end where you don't actually suffer a little bit in the process. But it's incredibly common. There's seemingly nothing I can do with the different types of grease or lubes used in there to mitigate the friction or the contact related wear. They just chew them right up.
Yeah. Have you experimented with any different cables that have you found to make a difference, or nothing?
I have experimented with them. I have not found one that makes a difference. I have this is another one of the examples of things for me, but not for everyone else. Shimano's polymer coated cables, those things are like 99% of the time a problem for everybody, except if you really are careful to feed them through every little ferrule opening and don't drag an edge or catch one and tear the polymer to where it bunches up and creates those little balls of like fuzz inside the where it enters or exits from the cable housing.
The bicycle fur ball.
Yes, exactly. So that alone can cause shifting problems before the cable itself actually starts to deteriorate from the wound element of the cable. So I like to use them because they really do feel good if you set them up just right and there's no issue there, but that's like a whole other kettle of fish. But no, to answer, unfortunately, no, I don't have a fix that really has proven to be more effective than anything else, other than just replace them probably more often than you're used to. Like back in the good old days when Shimano routed their shift cables externally and no one really liked how that looked, I guess after a while, I mean, Campy managed it without running them externally, and SRAM never really ran them externally at all. But when Shimano did it, I mean, those Dura 7700 kind of maybe the best, generally agreed upon the best shifting, feeling, whatever, performing group of all time. Arguable. I like it. It's very good. It doesn't look so, beautiful because of the cables on the front of the bike, but never seen one really rip the head off a cable like that. So, so that's kind of the funny thing. It's like a lot of the stuff in the industry right now, I feel like, is answering a problem that no one specifically had necessarily, but then you showed them how it could be, and then they kind of liked it, and then didn't really think about it too much in the way that it maybe affected the mechanical operation of the thing. And then you experience problems with the thing because it sort of is like perhaps not engineered to the level that it should be, or it's a compromise in the system to achieve a result that perhaps wasn't necessary in the first place, but now has created problems that didn't exist before either. So, so it's just like one of those things where you have to be aware of it. And if you are, it's not a big deal. And if you can do the work yourself, it's a few dollars for a cable once a year is no big deal. Of course, if you have an internally routed bike, an internally routed handlebar, and need to replace your cables and housing once a year and have to pay a bike shop to do it, then that could cost you $100 for a cable replacement, which is for some people a hard pill to swallow. And that's also a good sort of insight into the industry as a whole at the moment that I'm kind of feeling a little bit of misgiving toward on some topics, where I feel like we've kind of engineered ourselves into a hole and are now struggling to climb out of it. And I feel like there might be like a reverberation and we get a little pushback from consumers, or I don't know what, but that maybe we kind of it's modern frame design has basically it's almost made mechanical shifting redundant because of these frayed issues, these cable issues, right? Like it's almost forced people to accept electronic shifting for a reliable, maintenance-free system. I almost feel like they're sort of defaulting to everything being electronic and then reverse engineering some mechanical compatibility after the fact, that's kind of speculation, but an example of that, one in particular that I was privy to, was the UCI saying they would legalized road disc and then backpedaling from that for at least a season or two. At the same time, Specialized was releasing its first, the Venge Vias, if you recall, the very integrated one that was sort of the first one that had integrated everything through the bar, through the stem. In other words, no externally visible cables at all. And maybe the bike itself was a bit heavy and kind of not that popular, but it was the first really big mass-produced bike to do it. But then, and it was engineered as a disc-only bike initially. Then the UCI backed out on legalizing road disc, and they had to come up with a rim brake system that worked, or should have worked, but didn't really work very well. Yeah. And if you remember those sort of batwing looking, almost like a small V-brake caliper, but sort of hiding behind a fairing that was in like the wheel cut out of the rear wheel and kind of sitting behind the seat tube there, and then also like kind of tucked in behind the fork and in between the fork and down tube of the frame for the front brake. And man, that was such a sensitive thing. It was like you had about 3 millimeters of cable housing length that you could work within before it got too bunched up in the frame and the friction was too much to overcome, and it just like compromised the whole system. You couldn't turn the bars or tilt the bars without compromising the cable housing. And if you wanted to travel to an event as, for example, a pro athlete, which we had many of who wanted to do it and who were drinking the Kool-Aid and buying the hype on aerodynamics and were very excited about this bike, and then receiving the bike and then riding it, and it was all set up and wonderful, and they went to their first event, got there, took it out of the bike bag, and nothing worked at all. And that was sort of my first time. I was just like, are we on the right track with all of this stuff? But it was, in fact, the product of a technology that was walked back slightly because of road disc being delayed in its legality per the UCI for road racing. And so they had to put some mechanical brakes on a bike that was never meant to have them in the first place. So
I feel like that specific bike is one of those bikes that is still floating around in people's ownerships, and occasionally someone's actually riding it, and they're almost riding it just to make mechanics hate their life.
Well, whether that's why they're doing it or not, that is the outcome.
It's the outcome. And,
yes. Yeah. And
I'm not sure the owners still choosing to use that bike are necessarily trying to be vindictive about it, but it just so happens to be.
It is. And when I see one, I mean, they used to fly us like overnight, fly us to a place where a triathlete would have this bike and unable to ride it and unable to compete if no one showed up to fix it. And it was a crazy time, to say the least. And I had the disc version.
Fly us.
Yeah, the fly us. It fly us all over the world to fix your brakes. Yeah. Nice. So they probably lost all the money they would have made on that bike just in airfare for the mechanics who they paid to go and sort it out. But one of the funniest, this would be my last anecdote about the Venge Vias, was it's a race. I think it was in Abu Dhabi or something. It was an ITU triathlon race, and I can't remember which athlete it was at the moment. But nevertheless, was unable to get the Vias in working order for the race and borrowed a SL4 tarmac, which was at that time, I think we were on the 5th generation of tarmac. So it was even an outdated version of the tarmac road bike with off-brand components that weren't sponsor correct, and actually won the thing. He won the race. And the whole point of Specialized, in every company for that matter, involvement in sponsoring these athletes to do anything is to gather marketing assets to then use and sell these products. And so, and it's rare that you win one. So when you do, it's a huge deal. And he won one. It was a huge deal, except that none of the assets were usable because he was riding an outdated product. It showed nothing that could be sold. So, just one of the many fun moments from the circus of bike racing. But, a very good insight into some of the silly stuff that I think is kind of plaguing the industry. Some of it's innocuous. I mean, this cable thing is not the worst case scenario in terms of all of the bike quirky stuff I've seen, but it's still a pain. And to explain to somebody with their new Dura-Ace bike that, oh, by the way, you're going to have to replace these cables because that's just what they do and that's what happens. And I did 2 of them last Sunday alone. So it's a very real and very common thing that, if you have any Shimano road shifters newer than, 2016 maybe, odds are you're either you've experienced this or you should, if you haven't, you better go get your cables replaced right now. So,
yeah. And I guess for people that, I mean, the best maintenance here is preventative. So as you said, like replace them once a year or even more regular if you're riding a bunch of Ks. I would also say, normally once you're shifting down to the 11th tooth starts to get sluggish, that's probably the earliest sign of issue, and don't leave it after that. If all your gears are good but your 11th tooth is all of a sudden slow to shift from your 12 down to your 11, then you're on your way to a broken cable. So it's time to get it serviced immediately. Yeah,
and if your shop charges by the hour, the longer you wait, that cost is going to go up, because once you have a whole like octopus of cable strands in there that's just all over the place, extracting that little cable head, it's not so easy in that shifter either.
Yeah.
There aren't too many access points to get in there, and the more chewed up and wild the strands are inside, the longer that process takes. So depending on how they bill for their time, that could add up as well. So super
rare. I've also seen it ruin shifters, like where a loose strand gets caught up inside of like the teeth of the shifter, and at that point, I mean, those were never designed to be used as serviceable, and there's pieces in order to get into those Shimano shifters. I mean, you basically need to be a watchmaker. It's
exactly
it's not something I know any mechanic that's actively pulling apart and putting back together. So it could be a new shifter if it's something that you leave.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's a pretty good place to wrap things up. I'm going to save that reader question for an upcoming Ask a Mechanic episode, which we'll do in a live audience, and Brad will get you back for that. And
awesome.
have a bunch of questions. So I'll save that one because it's a good one. It's right up your alley. But
okay, good. We'll I have a bunch of answers. If this didn't give you some insight, I could talk about this all day, and I do for the most part. Yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, that's the episode. Thank you for tuning in to Geek Warning. As a reminder, we are fully supported by memberships. You didn't hear any advertisers on this podcast because our members, they fund it. So if you love what we do on this podcast, you love our content, please support it. It means a lot to us. It lets it happen. It lets it continue. Thank you. And if you haven't already, please leave us a review and a rating. It lets fellow geeks find this podcast and enjoy it just like you do. All right, that's it for this week. We'll see you next week. Cheers.